Where is going?
Thank you.
Right. There you go. How long is that?
Oops, I'll save it. Thank you. Now you check the time again, right?
Number two pencils only.
Give me a test. There. How many do you want? That's the question. How many do you want?
I still have nine. You? No, I still, I'm through my back in school.
Yeah, I'm driving, well, I'm driven back to school, and I didn't know this class today. That's much for me.
All right, friends. We're in the home stretch. Home stretch with a poem. If you've been here for the last several weeks, then you know we've been making our way through Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It's hard to summarize kind of where we've been. You know, I've been following along with this book by Malcolm Guite, which does a little bit of biography of Coleridge and some poem analysis and a lot of theology along the way. It's really a great little book. So I'm mostly just following Guite's insight on this. I'm no Coleridge scholar or anything like that, but I've appreciated the poem and the theological dimensions that we've talked some about the last several weeks. Can I just remind us a little bit of what that's looked like before we get to the document that I've given you there? You know, the poem has 7 parts. In the first part, we've got the mariner who grabs hold of a wedding guest on a way to a wedding, and he never makes it to the wedding because the mariner tells him his story of sailing, of heading off to the South Pole and being trapped by ice, and finally being delivered from that by a God-given albatross. And the mariner then shoots him down with his crossbow. All that in part 1, you remember? Then it moves forward. We see some natural consequences of that, of this violation of a sacred sort of trust and of generosity. The ship becomes becalmed. They have no food, no water. There's water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. You remember that? So a real sense of loss and of despair. Just when you thought that was bad, all of a sudden there's a rescue ship on the horizon, except it turns out that it's a ghost ship. That's the crew is just 2 figures. One is death, and one is death in life, or life in death. And you sort of think, really, what is going on here? It seems as though this violation of the trust, the gift that the albatross gives, turns out to have implications that are larger than we might have guessed. All right, last time we looked.
Stop you just for a second. So I was kind of trying to describe this to somebody.
That's right.
And who originally, like, I guess what I'm tying into Christianity, did the author tie it into Christianity? Did Coleridge tie it into Christianity? What are kind of the...
Yeah, you know, certainly it's true that Coleridge, who was sort of one of the founders of the Romantic movement in British poetry, has a mixed relationship to Christianity. In some ways, it seems sort of pantheistic. It's a sort of nature mysticism. On the other hand, Coleridge, by the end of his life, certainly sees that nature mysticism as the presence of the living God who makes himself known in Jesus Christ, right? So there's, for Coleridge himself, there were all sorts of theological overtones. How explicitly that ought to be unfolded, I am no expert, not expert enough to say. Guite thinks that Coleridge was being pretty intentional. Even as, you remember how we started off the very first day, I mentioned Coleridge.
What are the year differences between the author and...
Guite is a contemporary figure, right? We had dinner with him back in November when he came to visit us here, right, from Cambridge University. And he is, and Coleridge is the late 1700s, right? Early 1800s, yeah. But so Coleridge, you remember, had this sort of this vision that he liked to look at, right? An illustration from the natural world of the horned fly. You remember that? Horned fly is a little being or a little insect that in its larva stage, it starts to build a kind of shell for itself that is far too big for itself. But in fact, what it's doing is building something that eventually its own antenna will grow into. It has no antenna at that stage. So it's not just covering itself, it's building something that it has no idea is for its own growth. Geit uses that as an illustration. Coleridge seems to have had it in mind too, but Geit certainly uses that as an illustration of what Coleridge is doing in this poem. In this poem, written when Coleridge was in his kind of mid-20s and recognized as a classic by lots of folks right away. But then Coleridge himself ends up sort of living into it. The poem itself tells about adventures, is that the right word? When you're dealing with death and life in death, I don't know. But Coleridge puts together a poem that ends up having the contours of the life that Coleridge himself will live, the experience that he has. So in all sorts of ways, I think the answer is yes, the implications that we're looking at here come from Coleridge himself and from all sorts of other places.
Okay, appreciate it.
Yeah. So I started to say last time we looked at part 4, 7 parts. Part 4 then is right in the center, and in particular there, we're going to be revisiting this now. In particular there, we saw a sort of summation of the horrors that the mariner was encountering. You remember the line, 1,000 slimy things lived on, and so did I. After death has struck down the 200 others that are on the ship, corpses lying everywhere. The mariner wants to die, but he can't. Everything is hateful. He despises it all of the creatures that he sees. It's just ugliness everywhere. And then right in the middle of section 4, the mariner looks up at the moon, which is sort of symbol of God's grace. And the moon's light is shining down, and suddenly he's struck by the beauty there, and by a beauty that is cast down over all of this barren open sea. And the mariner finds himself suddenly drawn to see a kind of beauty and life in all that's there. You remember again the famous lines, "Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware." A few stanzas earlier, he was cursing everything. It's horrible, it's slimy, it's ugly, it's terrible. But now, with nothing the mariner has done, the moon, the god of the moon, transfigures everything. And he finds himself acknowledging with love and gratitude the world that's around him. And suddenly everything is changed. It seems as though he sees the world differently. All right, we've got that sort of transformation in mind, right?
It does say albatross drop off?
And the albatross drops off, right? After he shot it down, the crew, in kind of being upset with him, took the bird and hung it around his neck, this dead bird. And it falls off and sinks down into the sea. And the curse is broken in some sense. All right, we still have 3 parts of the poem to go. We started to see one of them last time. Today we're going to finish it up, right? So last time, as perhaps you recall, sort of the good news after the curse is broken is that some sort of supernatural power comes, kind of angelic figures, and they, still sounds kind of creepy, they re-inhabit these corpses that are lying on the ship, so that all of a sudden all of these dead men with some sort of angelic energy are operating the ship. And a breeze starts to blow, and then it's not just a breeze, something larger than a breeze begins to, a kind of supernatural power that somehow is driven by the spirit of the albatross, the polar spirit that was connected to the albatross, carries the ship along from under the water and so forth, and ends up moving it at supernatural speed in a direction that's gonna take our mariner back home. And that's kind of where we ended, that's where it comes on the page that I've given you here now. The last several stanzas that come from part 5. Where we've got the ship suddenly on its way and going so quickly in that first stanza around line 390. That the mariner says he fell down in a kind of faint, a kind of swoon. And here's where we want to start, because while he is in the midst of that, it's sort of this semi-consciousness, he's not perceiving anything clearly. But the mariner says, lines 396 and 7, I heard and in my soul discerned 2 voices in the air. So we've got some supernatural voices, some angels talking to one another about what's going on. That's where we start today, and then we're going to zoom home very quickly. Okay, that's all right. So here we go. Line 398 there. Is it he, quoth one, is this the man? By him who died on cross with his cruel bow, he laid full low the harmless albatross. There's his guilt, his crime. The spirit who bideth by himself in the land of mist and snow, that's that polar spirit that's been under the ship all this time. That spirit loved the bird that loved the man who shot him with his bow. Remember this from last time? We've seen the crime. Here's the grace. Even as the man was shooting the albatross, the bird loved the man, and the spirit that loved the bird has now been carrying the ship along and is taking it home. Things you never would have guessed, lots of interpenetrating things. Okay, now we get into something new. The other voice, right? 2 voices. The first one we've heard. The other was a softer voice, as soft as honeydew. Quoth he, the man hath penance done, and penance more will do. So we've seen some of his sufferings and things out on the ocean. But we're going to see more now. Let's see where it takes us. Into part 6. Ready? Fasten your seatbelts, gang. Still these 2 voices. The first voice. But tell me, I speak again, thy soft response renewing. What makes that ship drive on so fast? What is the ocean doing? The response. Still as a slave before his lord, the ocean hath no blast. His great bright eye most silently up to the moon is cast. You hear that? The ocean's not doing anything, but the ocean is responding to the direction of the moon. Think of the tides and things like that. But there's something more supernatural going on here, right? The moon, the grace of God is guiding the whole thing. If he may know which way to go, if the ship knows because the ocean is taking it someplace, if he may know which way to go, for she guides him smooth or grim. See, brother, see how graciously she looketh down on him. The moon always shining its grace down on the ocean, on the ship, on the mariner. Even in the midst of all of this horror show we've been watching, kind of Edgar Allan Poe come back to life. Even there, we see the grace of God. First voice, but why drives on that ship so fast, without wind? Oh, come on. There's nothing worse than a good poem badly read. Sorry about that. Here we go. Why drives on that ship so fast, without or wave or wind? The response, the air is cut away before and closes from behind. Fly, brother, fly, more high, or we shall be belated, for slow and slow that ship will go when the mariner's trance is abated. All right, you hear what's happened now? Some sort of a spooky explanation. The air moves out of the way, and the ship is sucked into the vacuum, and therefore everything behind it is pushing it and pulling it. All right, in some way the ship is moving at supernatural speed to its destination. The destination is going to turn out to be back to England, the home where he's been away from for so long. But things are going to slow down to a normal pace once the mariner comes out of his trance or his swoon. That's where we are now. So the mariner's going to wake up. Let's see what happens as this story continues. I woke, and we were sailing on as in a gentle weather. 'Twas night, calm night. The moon was high. There's good news. The dead men stood together. That's still creepy. All stood together on the deck. For a charnel dungeon fitter, it was better to have them in a slave dungeon. You would think, the way these guys look and so forth, all these corpses. All fixed on me their stony eyes that in the moon did glitter. Can we pause just for a minute there? Anybody remember familiar language like this about eyes that glitter? Does that sound familiar?
Than the wedding guest.
Yeah, do you remember that? When the mariner first speaks to the wedding guest trying to get into the wedding, but the glittering eye of the mariner kind of grabs him and holds him. All right, here now, these glittering eyes are somehow associated with the moon. The moon, the grace of God, the glittering eyes in the corpses. All right, somehow God is at work in ways that transfix, whether we get it or not, right? Are you horrified by it? Well, good, it's got your attention, doesn't it? Okay, God is doing more than we know. So watch how that unfolds, this sort of positive character, the moon working things out, though working them out through various kinds of evils, right? We're gonna see this sort of movement back and forth. So all of the crew fixed on me their stony eyes that in the moon did glitter. The pang, the curse with which they died had never passed away. I could not draw my eyes from theirs, nor turn them up to pray. Can you hear the negative? You've got all these corpses' eyes on you. How's that feel? All right.
So they're not alive, but they're not dead.
Exactly right. Or they're dead, but there's some sort of life in them. That we saw last time is a kind of angelic life, but they still have the same look as when they died.
Tim, I think that's called a zombie.
Well, exactly.
I
This
don't watch
clearly is not a zombie because there's some sort of graced life in them.
Yeah.
But they still have the appearance of horror. Is there theology in horror movies and zombie shows, do you think? Friends, if you don't think so, it's there. It's there, right? Theology's everywhere. Okay, so even when things are at their darkest, most terrifying, it turns out that God is doing something that you would never have guessed. Okay, so he's seeing the curse in the eye. But then the positive is back again. And now this spell was snapped. Once more I viewed the ocean green and looked far forth, yet little saw of what had else been seen. Right now he's looking out and he's seeing the beauty in the ocean again and so forth. Like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, there's negativity again, and having once turned round walks on and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Get the idea? There's fear at work, but he's looking out and he's seeing the moon and he's seeing the beauty, and so he keeps his eye there because he doesn't want to look over his shoulder. It's like some bad guy is chasing him, but the beauty is there. I picture Peter walking on the water, and when his eyes are on Christ, everything is going okay. But when his eyes are on the storm, there's trouble. You get the picture there? So it's that same sort of mixture. Okay, watch how the positive ends up sort of winning out here. But soon there breathed a wind on me, nor sound nor motion made. Its path was not upon the sea in ripple or in shade. It raised my hair, it fanned my cheek like a meadow gale of spring. It mingled strangely with my fears, yet it felt like a welcoming. Swiftly, swiftly flew the ship, yet she sailed softly too. Sweetly, sweetly blew the breeze. On me alone it blew. Can you hear? A breeze, a breath, a wind. You got any biblical images in mind? A spirit that suddenly touches the mariner himself, and all of the darkness and the horror turns out to be a part of the Spirit bringing life.
Breathe on me, brother God.
Yeah. Though when you say that, you usually have, oh, gentle, positive, isn't everything wonderful, sorts of things, all things bright and beautiful, you know. And in fact, here we've got dead men looking at you, and yet right in the center of that, God is breathing. God is doing larger things. All right, and so what happens? the Spirit breathes on him. And so in the midst even of these ups and downs, the surroundings still pretty gruesome in some ways. He finds himself suddenly within sight of his home. Turns out that all of this has been bringing him home. Let's go on. Oh, dream of joy. Is this indeed the lighthouse top I see? Is this the hill? Is this the kirk, the church? Is this mine own country? Back in the opening stanza, when the ship was leaving home, he sort of narrates how he sees things there, but he's getting further away, and as things sink below the horizon, he sees the church, and then it's sinking down. Or rather, he's going too far to be able to see it. And then he sees the hill that's kind of over and surrounding the church, then it's sinking down. Then he just sees the top of the lighthouse on the hill. Now he's approaching it again, and he sees the lighthouse, and there's the hill, and there's the church. Is this my country? We drifted o'er the harbor bay, and I with sobs did pray, oh, let me be awake, oh God, or let me sleep alway. Right, here's good news. I finally made it back home. The harbor bay was clear as glass, so smoothly it was strewn, and on the bay the moonlight lay. You'll be hearing something there. The moonlight is on the bay. There's God's operation right there now at his homecoming. On the bay the moonlight lay, and the shadow of the moon, or the reflection of the moon, we might say. So note how he's looking out, and he sees this beauty everywhere as he is coming into his home world. The rock shone bright, the kirk, the church no less, that stands above the rock. The moonlight steeped in silentness the steady weathercock, and the bay was white with silent light, till rising from the same full many shapes that shadows, reflections, were in crimson colors came. You get the idea? He's looked out, he sees the moon, he sees the bay that he knows, but now there are other figures, other lights, other shapes over the bay in different colors. And so he's going to turn back and look at the ship. What's going on? There's weird additional creatures or colors or something here. A little distance from the prow, those crimson shadows were. I turned my eyes upon the deck. Oh Christ, what saw I there? Each corpse lay flat, lifeless and flat, and by the holy rood a man all light, a seraph man, on every corpse there stood. Get the idea? 200 corpses. So they've been brought back to life by these angels, and somehow now on each corpse there is the angel light, the seraph man standing on each one. 200 angels all around, right? This seraph band each waved his hand. It was a heavenly sight. They stood as signals to the land, each one a lovely light. The seraph band each waved his hand. No voice did they impart, no voice, but oh, the silence sank like music on my heart. Can you hear the peace that's going on here now? Remember, there was so much silence when they were just adrift out on the ocean with no breeze. The silence there was oppressive. This is a silence as the angels sort of wave their hands, and the brightness of their light is a signal to the shore. But this is a silence that's like music, a kind of rest, a kind of peace. And now we come home. You ready? But soon I heard the dash of oars. Yeah, maybe we all know, right? A sailing ship like this that's coming into the harbor needs something, a boat from in at the shore, to come out and kind of guide it in, direct it in. So soon I heard the dash of oars, and I heard the pilot's cheer that's coming out from the shore. My head was turned perforce away, and I saw a boat appear. The pilot and the pilot's boy in the boat, I heard them coming fast. Dear Lord in heaven, it was a joy the dead men could not blast. I saw a third. I heard his voice. It was the hermit good. He singeth loud his godly hymns that he makes in the wood. He'll shrieve my soul. He'll wash away the albatross's blood. So right here comes these folks that are going to guide him home, the pilot, the pilot's boy, and with them the hermit that maybe he knew from the woods or had heard of in the woods, who can sort of bring to completion the forgiveness of his crime. by shriving him, by hearing his confession and giving a sort of sacramental finale to the forgiveness that's already come in the albatross being released and so forth.
Was the hermit introduced earlier or was this his introduction?
That's new now. Yeah, we haven't seen him before. But we're gonna get him a little bit now in part 7. We can go through this fairly quickly. What we want to see is, well, there's a big surprise that comes here at the end. Not quite at the end, but as we're going into part 7. Get ready, part 7, as we head in, kind of land the plane. That's the wrong kind of image in this, but anyway. We begin with the hermit again. This hermit good lives in that wood which slopes down to the sea. How loudly his sweet voice he rears. He loves to talk with mariners that come from a far country. So this is a hermit, a godly hermit who sings praise to God off in the woods, but he really likes talking to mariners who have been out to sea and who have creepy stories to tell. Strange things happen at sea. All right, the mariner says, let's watch. He, the mariner, he kneels at morn and noon and eve. He hath a cushion plump. It is the moss that wholly hides the rotted old oak stump. You hear some of the liturgical ideas of kneeling at morning and noon and eve on a cushion, except the hermit does that when he's out in the woods. So we have sort of the awareness of how Christ alive in the natural world and so forth. The skiff boat neared. I heard them talk. Right, what's the talk going on as they draw near to the mariner's ship? Why, this is strange, I trow. Where are those lights, so many and fair, that signal made just now? Can you hear? The pilot had been on shore. He saw lights out on a ship. He's going out to bring the ship in. Wait, that ship doesn't have any lights. What were those strange lights we saw? They were so bright before, and now they're gone. Something weird is going on here. Strange, by my faith, the hermit said. And they answered not our cheer. That is, when we called to them, they didn't respond. The planks look warped, and see those sails, how thin they are and sheer or worn. Look at that ship, it's falling apart. What's going on with it? I never saw aught like to them, unless perchance it were brown skeletons of leaves that lag my forest brook along. See dead leaves going through the water? That's what this ship looks like. When the ivy toad is heavy with snow and the owlet whoops to the wolf below that eats the she-wolf's young. All right, some natural imagery based on some myths in British folklore. Dear Lord, it hath a fiendish look, the pilot made reply. I am afeared. Push on, said the hermit cheerily. The hermit's kind of used to dealing with weird spiritual things. The pilot is ready to wet his pants. All right. The boat came nearer to the ship, but I nor spake nor stirred. The boat came close beneath the ship, and straight a sound was heard. All right, the boat is just coming up, the pilot's boat just coming up to where the mariner's ship is. And now, under the water, it rumbled on, still louder and more dread. It reached the ship. It split the bay. The ship went down like lead. All right, just when you thought that you've arrived home. Isn't this the way real life works? Guy builds on this a lot, right? Isn't this the way that life works? Just the time when you think, thank goodness I've been delivered, God has rescued me, everything is okay. At exactly that point, something like a depth charge sounds underneath the ship, and it echoes up, and everything is engulfed in it, and suddenly the ship is destroyed, and it's sinking, and he is down in the water with it. You thought the story was over, and now the worst of all, right? There's this last abandonment. Geit goes out of his way to say, this may be the place where most dramatically Coleridge's own story followed the path of the mariner, because things were kind of coming together for Coleridge with his poetry, in some relationships and things like that. And then there were some catastrophes, completely unexpected. You thought things were moving in the right direction. But then a new kind of falling out, sort of betrayal with his good friend William Wordsworth on the poetry front, some changes in relationships that Coleridge himself kind of was with the cause of some disastrous changes with some friends that he had. He ends up leaving a safe home that he's got in the middle of the winter. I mean, like in the middle of the night in a blizzard. He says, "I've had enough of this." And Coleridge walks out and goes out into the storm and walks several miles till he comes to an inn where he takes a massive overdose of opium that kills him, or should have killed him. The ship went down like lead. Thought everything was okay. Don't believe it. All right, now watch. Stunned by that loud and dreadful sound, which sky and ocean smote, like one that hath been 7 days drowned, my body lay afloat. 7 days drowned is sort of interesting. He's thoroughly drowned, but also, according to the folklore of the time, 7 days drowned. If a person died at sea, their body would stay underwater for 7 days. And on the seventh day, it would float to the surface. So here's this man who, in effect, has died, or at least that's the appearance. And now he's floating in the water like a drowned man. But swift as dreams, myself I found within the pilot's boat. Wait a minute, what just happened? Wasn't there death? Wasn't he underwater? Wasn't this a death in water? I wonder whether that rings any theological bells. Death in water that turns out to produce life. Do you hear baptism imagery there? Right? So, the mariner himself does nothing. He is the dead one. But he found himself in the pilot's boat. The pilot rescued him. Of course, we still have the water churning all around, so let's move on forward, right? Upon the whirl where sank the ship, the boat spun round, and all was still, save that the hill was telling of the sound. So the danger is still very real all around. I moved my lips. The pilot shrieked. Remember, the pilot has come up and he saw what looked like an abandoned ship with dead bodies everywhere. And the mariner wasn't speaking, he was just sitting there. He looks like one of them. And then the ship goes down and they pull up this one dead body. And suddenly it starts to talk to you. I moved my lips, you see. So the pilot shrieked and fell down in a fit. The holy hermit raised his eyes and prayed where he did sit. I took the oars. The pilot's boy, who now doth crazy go, laughed loud and long. Think of a hysterical kind of laugh. And all the while his eyes went to and fro. Ha, 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 quoth he, full plain I see the devil knows how to row. All right. It's creepy at every point. But now the ship is being rowed home. The mariner somehow has some sort of activity himself getting to shore. So we're finally in the place where the home arrival, we can see kind of how that works. And now, all in my own country, I stood on the firm land. The hermit stepped forth from the boat, and scarcely he could stand. Oh, shrieve me, holy man, says the mariner to him. Remember, shrieve means, hear my confession, give me sacramental grace that completes the forgiveness that's already come from the Lord. That's sort of the idea that's there. We still, this is where language of Shrove Tuesday comes from. Shriving is the confession that you give just as you're going into Lent, the day before Ash Wednesday. We still get that. I didn't know this, right? This language about shriving, we see most commonly in our world when we remember how priests who didn't do their job well sometimes would not want to hear a long confession from somebody. And so they would shorten the confession. All right, just give me the short version. Okay, your sins are forgiven, get out of here. Okay. That was called giving short shrift with someone. Yeah. You hear that language, right? All right, in any case, cool. Shrieve me, holy man. The hermit crossed his brow. Say quick, quoth he, I bid thee say, what manner of man art thou? In other words, tell me your story. Tell me who you are. All right. Now watch. Forthwith, this frame of mind was wrenched with a woeful agony, which forced me to begin my tale, and then it left me free. All right, there's a kind of agony. I've got to tell the story that's happened to me. When I speak it, then I'm relieved of the burden, so to speak. And this goes on. Since then, at an uncertain hour, that agony returns until my ghastly tale is told. This heart within me burns. I pass like night from land to land. I have strange power of speech. That moment that his face I see, I know the man that must hear me. To him, my tale I teach. Can you hear the penance that the mariner is continuing to do? He's done some penance. He's been out at the sea. He's been through all this, but the penance continues as he has to go around, traveling from land to land with a strange power of speech. He looks around, he sees, 3 folks on their way to a wedding. And he knows, I've got to talk to that one right there, maybe. You hear that? That's the one it's burning in me. It has to come out. And so to him, my tale I teach. So what's behind it all? All right, we're finally sort of, you might say, to the lesson, the summary line, if you're looking for the Cliff Notes version. Here we go. What loud uproar bursts from that door? The wedding guests are there. Can you see how we've shifted our gaze now? Look, there's the wedding that's going on. Oh, the wedding party is there. They're in the reception. Oh, that's where the big party is. Life, that's exactly right. The joys, the everyday happiness. Oh, that's great. But in the garden bower, the bride and bridesmaids singing are, and hark the little vesper bell, which biddeth me to prayer. There's a big party going on, but something deeper is also at work, something that calls me to prayer. The bride and bridegroom are really all about prayer, which is better. O wedding guest, this soul hath been alone on a wide, wide sea. So lonely 'twas that God himself scarce seemed there to be. Oh, sweeter than the marriage feast is sweeter far to me to walk together to the kirk, the church, remember, with a goodly company. Sweeter than the marriage feast, sweeter than the reception, sweeter than the party, the excitement of life. That's what I'm after. I'm going after the excitement of life. No. Sweeter than all of that is prayer in the company of those who are seeking God's face. To walk together to the kirk and all together pray while each to his great Father bends, old men and babes and loving friends and youths and maidens gay. Coleridge himself, by the end of his life, is back into a more traditional kind of relationship to the church and to the people around him. He says, I don't need the adventures in quite the same way. There are deeper things going on. Okay, here we go now. Remember, the wedding guest has heard this whole story, and so have you. So you're the wedding guest now. What party are you drawn to? What tale do you need to hear instead? Okay, here we go, the last several stanzas. Farewell, farewell, says the mariner, but this I tell to thee, thou wedding guest. He prayeth well who loveth well, both man and bird and beast. He prayeth best who loveth best all things, both great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all. Do you hear how the mariner's story of violation of what's good and noble, of an order that's built into the world, is punished? He bears its consequences, but in the midst of it, there is grace that allows him to see and to love beauty that's everywhere, that he had not seen or loved before. He prayeth best who loveth best. Couple of stanzas that wrap things up. The mariner whose eye is bright, glittering, you remember, whose beard with age is hoar, is gone. And now the wedding guest turned from the bridegroom's door. He's not going into the party. He's going off to do something else. He went like one that hath been stunned, and is of sense forlorn. A sadder and a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn. Is this a happy tale?
Renewal. It doesn't end on a happy note.
Yeah, well, it doesn't end on a note that's what my friend says is happy clappy, does it, right? It ends with wisdom. It ends with understanding depths that he had not understood before. Something that takes him beyond just getting to the wedding reception and trying to get some of that champagne or whatever it is. Instead, there are deeper and higher, there are darker and brighter realities absolutely all around us. The wedding guest, is that you? The wedding guest has been invited to see these higher, larger, greater, more terrifying things. And grace right in the middle of it. Should we look at this this paragraph that comes from Geit? Geit kind of summarizes the poem.
Well, that
And then we'll be
last,
done.
that last, it's seems to the sadder and wiser. You don't get a sense of hope from that. He's wiser. Wisdom is knowledge and appreciation of what that knowledge is, but you wonder whether or not Coleridge sees hope.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you can read it into it or you can read it out of it.
right. Well, in a sense, it's gonna depend on how you see the whole poem, isn't it? Right? Is the poem mostly about death and suffering and, law and punishment and things like that? Or is it instead about grace operative through absolutely every line? You see what I mean? But again, you're right, it's not
It
grace in sort of a superficial sense. It's not,
It doesn't end happy clappy.
it certainly doesn't, right? If you want to know grace, then you have to know suffering. If you want to know the glory, then you know the cross. And you never kind of say, oh yeah, a cross, isn't that great? We're in Ash Wednesday, right? Or we're in Lent now, Ash Wednesday last week. So there's things going on here that always summon us to something deeper. Remember the verse in Ecclesiastes that says, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of singing. I think Coleridge has something like that in mind. Not because we want to be in despair, but because if you want to understand real hope in the midst of the real world, then look at the cross. Right?
A penny's worth of thought, God reminded me, the happy end, like, happy trails. I mean, the old Western movies, they all ended that way, riding off in the suns, to the suns,
That's
the
right.
sunshine. Two things, I think in line with that, when the mariner previously, I didn't get a chance to say, that when he looked at the corpses and they still looked at him with glassy eyes, with frozen eyes. I was thinking, you all have been in funeral homes and saying goodbye to the deceased. Sometimes they are displayed, sometimes with a closed coffin. What goes through our heads as we see the dead? Do we think about the dead man, or do we think about when that person was alive? We think of what was, not what is, because we have no imagination of what the other side really looks like.
I think why are they showing me this dead man?
Funny? So,
And the eyes are always closed.
yeah.
Maybe this is why, right? You don't want especially if it's somebody you've wronged, and their last look is one that's got their eye on you, and, you know, the kind of a curse.
And even the mariner is attracted by, or distracted, or attracted by the moon.
Mhm.
And the new life and the glittering water that now has beautiful colors.
Mhm,
He doesn't see those creatures anymore.
mhm, mhm.
So very often, near death, often leads to a renewal of life.
Huh.
And a new appreciation, Scott, a new appreciation for nature, what God has given. And perhaps that is the point of the poem here, that the mariner all of a sudden appreciates life for what it is and what it holds for him.
Mhm.
And that's when the wedding guests come back in and here's the noise of the happy, people,
Mhm.
because there is new life, new birth, new generation, perhaps, and so on. So
And the last line of the poem is not a sadder and a wiser man. That's not the last line. The last line is he rose tomorrow morn. That's a word of hope,
He lived on.
openness into the future, I think.
thanks for doing
So living into the future, in fact, with a certain kind of sadness that makes me a wiser man, that invites me to live even in the darkness, even in the brokenness.
Manfred, I would say though that
Yeah.
he has a comma after the word man as opposed to a semicolon. I think that links the two. A sadder and a wiser man, he rose the far more. Whereas if he had said a sadder and a wiser man, semicolon, and he rose the far more, I would interpret it more the way you said. They're linked by just the comma.
I think that's true, but I would have read it in just the opposite way. It seems to me that the link is precisely, well, he rose the next day, sadder and wiser. In other words, the new beginning that the next day brings is now instructed by the wisdom that has come through suffering. So it seems as though there's, again, that the day is new. There are new opportunities,
They go together.
and the wisdom that comes through suffering lets us take advantage of them, right?
He wrote this in his twenties, so this was before his near-death experience with, the overdose
Right,
of the opiate.
Yeah, 40 years before.
Well, the finishing there's at least, I think, this author and you see some foretelling or something like that of what's coming. Coleridge is like,
Well, and Coleridge himself saw that by the end. Coleridge found himself as the character in his poem. Not that he planned that, of course. Who was planning that? But something going on. Yeah. Listen, I know it's run late. I apologize for keeping us here too long. Have a look at the paragraph there at the end where Guy summarizes this sometime. I'm not gonna read through it now, but he does a nice job of reminding us of lots of different things that have gone on, lots of depths, you might say, that have been investigated, and that the wedding guest and we wedding guests are invited to keep in mind and to profit from. So it may be worth looking at some
Well,
point.
Steve, any insight into his reference to Midway Island?
Well, so maybe we ought to look at it. So he summarizes what's going on in the poem. Guy summarizes that for 6 lines or something like that. But midway through, let's see, in the 5th line down, midway through that line, finally he says, the poem has brought us home to ourselves, sadder perhaps, but wiser. Now here we go, home to our situation in the world. So he's regarding the poem as sort of prophetic in a way of our world. As the balance we have wantonly broken in nature. Think about our environmental catastrophes, right? The things we do to the environment. As the balance we've wantonly broken in nature unleashes terrifying forces on us, foretold in the breaking of polar ice, This is global warming and the fact that ice in the poles no longer looks as though it's quite the same as it was in the past. And the death of albatrosses on Midway Island. So, right, you can go to all sorts of islands, not just Midway, but all sorts of islands in
But-
which the natural life is being killed because of environmental issues and so forth.
Is Midway where the A-bomb tests were done? Was there A-bomb testing done at Midway or not at all there?
I don't know, maybe
So
somebody
it was the turning point of the war,
Yeah,
Philippines,
it was,
the shift.
right.
I don't know whether there are albatrosses uniquely associated with what's going on in Midway. I mean, one could imagine that he's thinking of Midway Island, the turning point in the war. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Look at the island itself and how the kind of havoc that gets wreaked there by what we call a good thing. You know, so I wonder whether he's got in mind the sense in which so much of our contemporary world is treating the environment, is treating life in general according to the standards that we have in mind and that we've invented, rather than respecting the intrinsic beauty and goodness, God-given order that's there. And so we find trouble at every turn. Maybe we need some sadness and wisdom that will allow us to deal with that.
So if Hollywood ever writes a screenplay on this, I'm imagining that as this guy is, yeah, he rose in the morning, there's an albatross, flying up above him somewhere.
Yeah,
Somehow,
maybe
like
so,
a figure,
maybe so.
the price figure, has to return.
Yeah, maybe so, maybe so. Yeah, you know, that line that I highlighted before, but it was actually, we read it again last time. You remember how the polar spirit loved the bird, the albatross, that loved the man, the mariner, who shot him with his bow. So yeah, there is something in the albatross, even in its death, that is Christ who loves us, and that's the reason for the death that brings life. Yeah, there are deeper things here than you might expect.
Thank you.
So, is that tied up with a bow? I'm not sure it is. Right? There's a lot there. Think about it a little bit. Let's pray together as we go, shall we? Lord our God, in Jesus' name, we trust that you are always doing larger, greater things than we might imagine. Sometimes things of beauty and hope in the more obvious way. The resurrection from the dead, may it come soon. But sometimes we remain in Lent, and your goodness in our midst is goodness in the face of suffering and trouble and hardship. Grant us, we pray, the ability today to live in light of hope, with the wisdom that doesn't ignore the heartache in the world, but that somehow follows Christ right into the midst of it. Will you help us to be men who are faithful to you right where you've placed us, with all of its joys and troubles, so that you will be pleased and glorified until the day we see you make all things new. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.